Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to our gold sponsor, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, we are pleased to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Peter Diamandis. Dr. Diamandis was just named one of the world's 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine. Dr. Diamandis is chairman and CEO of the XPRIZE Foundation, best known for its $10 million Ansari XPRIZE for private spaceflight. Dr. Diamandis is also the co-founder and executive chairman of Singularity University and is the New York Times best-selling author of Abundance: The Future is Better Than You Think. Please welcome Dr. Peter Diamandis.
We're truly living in an extraordinary time. And my goal in this next 40 minutes is to give you a gut feeling of the rate of change. I'll start by saying we haven't seen anything yet. This decade, we're going to be seeing 100-fold the level of change that we've seen this past decade. The rate of acceleration is extraordinary. So let's jump in. I serve running 4 different companies. 2 of them give me a unique perspective. One is called Singularity University, I'll introduce in a moment. The other is called the XPRIZE Foundation. And I get to see a lot of innovation, meet a lot of entrepreneurs, and really put my finger on the pulse of what's going on. And those companies and the way I was seeing the world led me to write a book I'm very proud of. It's a book, if any of you are authors like I am, it's either hard or it flows out of you. And this one flowed out of me, and I was so, I needed to tell this story. And I want to just share a little bit of it. The book's called Abundance: The Future is Better Than You Think. And it did really well. And I go around and I talk about the fact that we're truly heading towards this extraordinary world of abundance. And there was no better situation for an author or an entrepreneur than to literally have the President of the United States out there thumping your book. And I had the chance to close out the Clinton Global Initiative this year, and I found that President Clinton was a fan of abundance and got out there, and he was interviewing me at the end of this, and he brought the book up and talked about this. And he asked me, he said, "Why are you so positive about the future? Don't you watch the news?" And I said, "Mr. President, actually, I try not to." And there are 2 reasons that I'm positive about the future, and let me share those. The first is I look at the numbers. The second is I try not to watch the news. And we're living in a day and age, and it's important for us as CEOs because how we think affects everything. And we're living in a day and age where the news media is a drug pusher. And on every channel you have, television, radio, newspaper, internet, cell phone, you are being bombarded. We are all being bombarded with negative news over and over and over again, constantly. Every murder on the planet is being delivered to your eyeballs in high definition over and over again. And you have to ask the question, why is this? Is this the way the world truly is? Or are we seeing some kind of a perverted view of the planet out there? And I would posit that that's not the way the world truly is. And let me share with you a little bit. The first is that as we were evolving in the savannas of Africa hundreds of thousands and millions of years ago, if you missed a piece of good news, it's too bad. But if you missed a piece of bad news, like a rustle in the leaves was a tiger and not the wind, your genes were out of the gene pool. You were literally dead meat. And for that reason, we evolved an ancient piece of our temporal lobe called the amygdala. And the amygdala is about the size of your thumbnail, and it scans everything that you see and everything that you hear first. And if it sees something that's dangerous or perceived dangerous, it puts you on red alert. And for that reason, we pay 10 times more attention to negative news than positive news. Which is why the newspapers, the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads, is so true. So open up the paper if you're staying here at the Westin or if you flew in or whatever. Open up the paper and just look at it for a moment. And you'll see constant negative news. But I believe that's not the way the world truly is, that we truly are living into an extraordinary world. Here's some of the evidence that I talk about in Abundance and is going to explain why this is going on. The first is in the world we're living in today, The per capita income over the last 100 years for every nation on this planet has more than tripled. The lifespan has more than doubled. The cost of food has dropped 13-fold. The cost of energy has dropped 20-fold. The transportation has dropped 100-fold. Communications over 1,000-fold. Right? This is, if we can keep the IMAG, keep this on slides, that'd be great. We're truly, this is the cover of The Economist magazine from last year, that we're heading towards the end of poverty. We're heading towards a time where literally we're going to be wiping out extreme poverty on this planet. And that has huge implications. And I'll explain that in a moment. And then my friend Steven Pinker at Harvard wrote this book called The Better Angels of Our Nature that shows us we're living during the most peaceful time ever in human history. Your chance of dying a violent death are 1/500th of what they used to be. But you wouldn't know that watching the Crisis News Network or the constantly negative news network, or whatever you want to call CNN. Because that's not their job. And when I have to watch this news story over and over and over again for 2 months straight and say, is there no other news in the world than with due deference to lives lost in Malaysia than seeing this airline crash? I mean, please. There's a reason for that. And they could not pay me enough money to bias the way I think. And as CEOs and as leaders, you have to understand that who you spend your time with, what news you allow to be seen, affects everything of the way that you think. So allow me to share with you a few other points. This is the world's population growth. We just crossed the 7 billion mark. This is the internet growth that we've seen. In 2010, we had 1.8 billion people connected on planet Earth. By 2020, that number is going from 1.8 to at least 5 billion. If my friends at Facebook or Google or SpaceX or Qualcomm have anything to do with it, it'll be 7 billion people connected at a megabyte per second. So what happens when 3 billion new minds all of a sudden enter the global economy, not 20 years or 50 years, these next 5 years? 3 billion new minds who never bought anything before, have never uploaded or downloaded anything before. They represent tens of trillions of dollars flowing into the global economy. They represent an epic era of innovation. They represent the beginning of a truly exponential age. They represent your future customers, or if not your customers, they're your customers' customers. And what are you thinking about this? Because it's on your planning horizon. It's next 5 years. So I want to cover two subjects very quickly. The first is exponential technologies. The second is just a tease on my next book, Bold, that comes out in February. So I study exponential technologies in Silicon Valley. I had the pleasure of being executive chairman of a university that's backed by Google, Autodesk, Genentech, NASA, 3D Systems, a whole group of companies. And we study those technologies doubling in power year on year on year. And the convergence of these technologies and how they literally will change every single industry, every single company. Nothing will escape. One of the take-home lessons I'll say to you now and repeat again later, you either disrupt yourself or someone else will. Unless you're not making a profit, in which case it doesn't matter. And one of the things that we do is we teach our students who come through the program. We run graduate level programs for top graduate students around the planet, executive level programs for groups like yourself, and then programs for Fortune 200 CEOs and C-suites. For our graduate students, our mission is we want you to start a company during your program, actually start a company, a product or service that has the potential to impact 1 billion people in 10 years. And that's their metric of success. And the notion that today a guy or a gal in the garage can come up with something that could positively impact the lives of 1 billion people in a decade is extraordinary. But it truly is what an individual can do. That's the game that we're playing in today, and that's the sort of the swing at the bat that we're asking our graduate students to work on, a 10 to the 9th plus company. So I talk about exponentials. What does that feel like? We're all wired to think in a linear fashion. Our hardware and wetware of our brain, we think de facto in a linear fashion. If I say to you, I want you to take 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in 30 linear steps, I'm in the hallway. But if I said to you, I want you to take 30 exponential steps, and exponential being a simple doubling again, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, in 30 exponential steps, unless you have it memorized, you don't realize you're a billion meters away. Or put differently, you've gone around the planet 26 times. And it's that difference between our cognitive biases of us being linear thinkers, despite whatever we want to try and do, and the world growing exponentially, that's the challenge. And this is what the curve looks like, right? That red line is all of us. It's our employees, it's our politicians, it's our kids, it's our customers, it's our boards of directors. We're linear thinkers in a linear mindset. And we haven't had a hardware or software upgrade in 50,000 years. It's been a while. The yellow line is AI, robotics, synthetic biology, digital medicine, 3D printing, network sensors that are growing exponentially. Right now, we're during an epic period of technological growth, and we should and can feel it, right? And I hope at the end of this section you will feel that. And the difference between this linear thinking and this exponential tech growth is really what I want to be talking about today. Because it's either disruptive stress or disruptive opportunity, depending on your point of view. If you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and some kid comes up with a disruptive product or service that can put you out of business, it's disruptive stress. If you're the kid, it's disruptive opportunity. No better example, if you would, than this one. 1996, Kodak is at the top of its game, right? It's got a brand like nobody else. $28 billion market cap, 140,000 employees. What most people don't realize is that 20 years earlier, in 1976, Kodak had invented the digital camera. They had it in their labs. They had the patents, they had the first mover advantage. They understood what it could do. The problem was, it was at the very beginning of the technology. And when Steven Sasson, the designer, the engineer, walks into the board of directors with this first digital camera that takes 0.01 megapixels, 0.01 megapixels in black and white, the board says, what, are you kidding me? This is a toy for kids. We're Kodak. We make beautiful, high-resolution images. How can I play with this stuff? Besides, it's a cost center. We're a paper and chemicals business. And so the fact that they didn't connect with what business they were truly in ultimately led to their filing Chapter 11 in 2012. And so I talked to top corporate CEOs and I say, what business are you really in? And do you really understand where you should be investing? So they filed Chapter 11 in 2012. In the same year, another business, also in the digital memory business, if you would, the photographic memory business, a company called Instagram gets acquired by Facebook for $1 billion. But they've got 13 employees. And it's that disconnect, this notion of a linear thinking company being disrupted by exponential technologies, that I give you a new name for it. I call it the new Kodak moment. Thank you for laughing. So we're going to be seeing this happening over and over again. And the stat from Olin School of Business that supports this, and I believe it, is that in the next decade, 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies will no longer exist. Put differently, and this comes from Richard Foster at Yale, who said, if you started a company in the 1920s, your average stay on the S&P 500 was 67 years. You could build it, you could milk it, you could run it, no one was disrupting you. But today you start a company, and your average runtime on the S&P 500 is 15 years. You're MySpace, worried about Facebook, worried about Google+, or whatever's next. There's always someone nipping at your heels because the rate of corporate creation, of innovation, is expanding rapidly. So it looks like something like this. And I think we're going to see this, and hopefully you're noticing this, because I see this all the time from my purview at the XPRIZE and SU up in Silicon Valley, which is the rate at which we're going from I've got an idea to I run a billion-dollar company is exploding. We're seeing a whole slew of companies, many we hear about, many we don't. YouTube, Chad Hurley starts YouTube on his credit cards and sells it to Google for $1.6 billion 18 months later. Palmer Luckey starts Oculus VR with a $3 million Kickstarter campaign and sells it to Facebook for $2 billion 18 months later. If I were to go to Andy Taylor at Enterprise Rent-A-Car or to the taxi commissioners in San Francisco and say, listen, a group of 5 guys are going to start a company, and they're never going to buy a car, but 5 years later, they're going to have an $18 billion valuation, and they're going to take away 65% of the taxi traffic in San Francisco, you would have thought them nuts. But in fact, that's what Uber did, that's what Airbnb is doing for their equivalent, and we're seeing this more and more. So what's driving that is this. Ultimately, it's the rate of computational power that's available. And ultimately, the computational growth rate is really the growth medium for a whole slew of other technologies. What used to be only available to the CTO of a Fortune 500 company or a government lab is now available to a kid in Mumbai. I mean, sort of like putting that exclamation point on that, and we'll talk about what that means. So this is computational power over the last 110 years. On the left-hand axis is a log scale of how much you could buy with $1,000. And what we're seeing here is a very rapid increase. On a log scale, an exponential is a straight line. This is curving upwards, which tells us that the rate at which computers are getting faster is itself getting faster. And if you project it forward, what you get is some extraordinary capabilities. So the average computer, like the one driving this presentation today, is calculating at about 100 billion calculations per second, which is, by the way, more computational power than the US government had going to the moon and going, well into the 70s. And every time you take your iPhone 5 and throw it in the drawer, you're throwing away supercomputing power that the government would have killed for 20 years ago. And we think nothing of it. We dispose of it like, oh yeah, a drawer full of old cell phones. In 2023, 9 years from now the average $1,000 computer that you're using, that you go down and buy from Best Buy if they're still around, is 10 to the 16th cycles per second, which is just a number unless you speak to a neurophysiologist who tells you that's the rate at which your brain and my brain does pattern recognition, visual and auditory pattern recognition. But it doesn't stop there, because 25 years later, now the average $1,000 computer buys you the rate of the entire human race. Now our kids' homework gets really simple. So I want to give you a framework of how I teach this. I coach hundreds of CEOs, and I spend time talking about how do I think about exponential technologies. And it's important to have a framework to give you. So the first is that anything that becomes digitized enters a period of deceptive growth and then becomes disruptive growth. So digitization, manufacturing's been digitized, finance, biology, medicine, all of these things. Whenever something becomes ones and zeros, measurable and executable in bits, in deceptive growth, we don't notice the deceptive growth, right? So if I were to ask, how many of you know about 3D printing? Raise your hand. Please just take it. Okay, thank you. How many of you, all of you, how many of you knew about 3D printing 5 years ago? Raise your hand. Okay, a good number in an engineering town. How many of you 20 years ago? It's a 35-year-old technology. When Chuck Hall developed the first 3D printing capability, it's been in deceptive growth and is now just now becoming disruptive. And when something becomes disruptive, it dematerializes, it demonetizes, and it democratizes. And let me jump into what each of those means, because it's ultimately part of this story. So the first is, what does dematerialization mean? Basically this. 20 years later, all of these things fit in your pocket. Right? I mean, I don't carry a GPS anymore. It's on my phone. It's not on my dashboard of my car. I don't carry an HD camera or video camera or two-way video conferencing capability or a flashlight. All of these things have become bits and apps on my phone. And ultimately, my phone will dematerialize itself into the fabric of my clothing, into the fabric of the rooms. Dematerialization, so I talk to people and say, which of your products or services will become dematerialized? And once they do, what happens next is they become demonetized, right? Uber has taken 65% of the traffic from San Francisco and is pressing around the world. Skype, I don't call my sister in Greece, I Skype with her. We've got Amazon, the bookstores, Google, and the libraries. Airbnb is decimating many hotel room nights, and ultimately, Craigslist decimated the newspapers. And once something becomes dematerialized and demonetized, it becomes democratized. And what that means is that literally we are entering a period of time where there'll be 1 billion handsets in Africa in 2016. And if you wanted to reach 1 billion customers in Africa, you needed to have been, Muhtar Kent at Coca-Cola or Jeff Immelt at GE with arms and legs in all of these countries. Today, you can be a guy or a gal in the garage with a great application that can become literally virtually distributed around the world. And at the same time that this democratization goes on, and please think about this a moment, that teenager in Mumbai on a cell phone has got better mobile comm than the President of the United States did 30 years ago. And if they're on a smartphone on Google, they have access to more knowledge and information than President Clinton had 20 years ago. And that kid in Mumbai on a smartphone has got access to the same Google that Larry Page, the CEO of Google, has. And we're going to be seeing, at least I think he does. We're going to be seeing this kind of democratization occur across everything. Learning, healthcare. More on that in a moment. So I mentioned that rapidly growing capability of computational power is sort of the growth medium, the foundation on which a whole set of technologies are building. And these are roughly the technologies: computers, networks, sensors, robotics, 3D printing, and so forth. This is what we spend a week at during our executive programs at Singularity University. You'll excuse me if I cover it in 7 minutes with you instead. Let me go and focus on the first one, which is artificial intelligence. AI is the ability of a computer to understand what you're asking, to search its memories and come up with a relevant answer for you. We know it first as HAL from 2001. You know it as perhaps Jarvis if you're an Iron Man fan, or just Siri on your phone. But 2 years ago, to demonstrate the power of their supercomputer named Watson, named after James Watson, the founder of IBM, Michael Roden, who runs that program, who's a friend, who teaches at Singularity University, decided to basically challenge the all-two-time Jeopardy champions. The guy who won the most money on the left, the guy who won the most games on the right. I want to show you a video clip of Watson decimating its human opponents. Audio up.
Ken, you're in the first position. Please make a selection.
I've never said this on TV. Chicks dig me for 200, please, Jimmy.
Kathleen Kenyon's excavation of this city mentioned in Joshua showed the walls had been repaired 17 times. Watson.
What is Jericho?
Correct.
400, same category.
This mystery author and her archaeologist hubby dug in hopes of finding the lost Syrian city of Urkesh. Watson.
Who is Agatha Christie?
Correct. Watson.
Who is Mary Leakey?
You're right. Watson.
What is Crete?
Yes.
Let's finish Chicks Dig Me.
At Mount.
I love that. I swear they do that on purpose. So what is Watson? Watson was a room-sized computer about the size of this stage, some 3,000 Power 7 core processors. It was not hooked up to the internet. It had downloaded Wikipedia into its memory bank, so it could process it at 1 million books per second. And it was able to search all of its memories and find relevant points, pull it together, and then provide an answer. In fact, it would provide the top 3 answers for you to see, and then it would pick the top answer. And I have to tell you, that was so 2 years ago. And a lot's happened since then. And most importantly, what's happened is that IBM has put Watson up on the cloud and created an open API, a user interface, if you would, that entrepreneurs are now programming. And it's also put a $100 million venture fund to fund entrepreneurs to develop applications. And the first place they're going is taking Watson to medical school. And I went to medical school many years ago. I had 2 companies going my 4th year, barely graduated, don't come to me for anything. But ultimately, medicine is the ability to take all this data and process it. And the amount of data that any normal human physician has today cannot be fathomed for looking even at one patient. You can't possibly process all that data. But Watson can. And Watson has turned out to be, orders of magnitude better at diagnosing cancer, but it's also going into many other places: material design, fashion, food, all kinds of places. So imagine anything that's got a huge amount of knowledge, where an AI can start pulling pieces together and giving you a better knowledge than any single human with just 300 million pattern recognizers in your brain. This is where AI is going to become powerful and accessible to anyone with a phone. It's part of the future of where we're going. And besides AI, let's talk about sensors. Here's that guy, Steven Sasson, who came up with the first digital camera. You can understand why the board sort of didn't embrace this 4-pound, $10,000, 0.01 megapixel camera. But of course, that's where it was. Where it is today, here we go. Where it is today is this, 1 billion times better, right? But guys, listen to me. This is where it is today. It doesn't stop here. And I can't, we have this bias as humans to like think, okay, we've reached there. But it isn't. Where is it going to be 10 years from now? It's 1,000 times better. Or 20 years from now, it's 1,000,000 times better. Are we going to have literally, high definition eyes like we have in insects woven into our clothing in every material, every surface area? Because this is just where it is today. It doesn't stop. Let's look at another sensor. This is the inertial measurement unit, the IMUs that got us to orbit, got us to the moon. Tens of millions of dollars, tens of pounds. Today, it's $1 on your phone. But again, this is where it is today. It doesn't stop here. It continues. It's going to be molecular in size, and every piece of clothing and every material produced, velocity vectors, acceleration, all of these things will be measured because you can, and it's free. Talk about the Internet of Everything exploding into a trillion sensor economy. The first GPS, imagine this thing in the dashboard of your SUV, $120,000, 53 pounds. And of course, today, it's a few bucks on a chip. Anybody know what this is a photo of? Tesla plant. Anybody see the human overlord in the image? Robotics are entering every aspect of every factory and soon every part of our home and our lives this decade again. One of the most interesting things that occurred last year was a certain search company called Google bought 8 robot companies. What is Google buying 8 robotics companies? That I know of. God knows how many more they've purchased. And I want to show you one of them that a friend of mine, Mark runs, called Boston Dynamics. Let's take a look at the panoply of robots in Google's menagerie right now. So this is Petman, built to go into a burning building or a nuclear power supply, whatever it might be. But you can imagine Petman going in and helping your aging mother or grandparent out of the bed to the restrooms. They don't have to go to an old age home, which is why most people go to old age homes leaving comfort of their home because they can't take care of themselves. Mark studies limb movement. This is a very famous footage of this guy kicking this robot, how lifelike that looks. And this is a bigger dog, if you would. And the last thing I do is go for a walk through the woods and see this guy coming out at you. And of course, famously for the city of Detroit, can we go to the next? This is another robot, Google's autonomous car. And in the mid-90s, when Stanford finished the DARPA Grand Challenge and Google took on building a first autonomous car, there was a lot of dismissal on would this be of interest. But every major car company has now announced plans for some degree of autonomy, partial or full autonomy, this next decade. And I have 2 3-year-old boys that chances are they will not drive. Chances are they will be driven around by an autonomous vehicle 15 years from now when they get their driver's license. And ultimately, this changes a lot of things for a lot of different companies because all of a sudden, you can put 8 times as many autonomous cars on the roadway than regular cars. You get 8 times the packing density. And if you don't necessarily need to own a car anymore versus own access to a car. Let me be very clear. Travis, who runs Uber, his ultimate game plan is autonomous cars. because the most expensive part of his operations are people. And if you can take the people out of the equation, profits go up tremendously. And if all of a sudden cars, don't need to park because right now they lay fallow 95% of the time, I don't need a driveway or a parking garage or a parking lot or any of these things. And, are they safe? Well, I'll tell you, I've had a chance to drive in them a number of times. I don't know how many of you had a chance to drive in any of the manufacturer's autonomous car. Let me show you just a short clip of Google's car on a slalom course. I hope I have the bleeped out version.
Oh my God. Oh dear Lord.
Oh my God, this is so awesome.
Oh my God.
And of course, they're not ready for prime time now, but they will be. And it's not a matter of, of if, it's only a matter of when. Sensors are getting better, computational power is getting better at an extraordinary rate, and the ability for me to have my autonomous car take my 12-year-olds to their friend's home versus me having to do it is going to save me time and give me added value like I cannot imagine. But there's also something interesting going on with these autonomous cars, because in order for them to operate, they need to be sensing. And there's an explosion going on in the sensor arena. So this is video from Google's autonomous car that has a LiDAR, a laser imaging radar, 60 eye-safe lasers going around generating 750 megabytes of data per second. And that LiDAR is seeing everything on the road. It's seeing a person being pickpocketed. It's seeing a person literally, crossing the street or lifting a window, or a dog crossing the street. It's seeing everything going on in 360-degree view, and that's just one car. Imagine 1% of the cars in the fleet, 2 million of them. Every single road all day long, 24/7, will be mapped. If you thought privacy was dead, think again, right? Because this is just the beginning of what Cisco calls the Internet of Everything, or a trillion sensor economy, where you can know anything you want anytime you want. And as a way I look at this, if those cars aren't enough, there are at least 5 private orbital constellations going up. And these orbital constellations will deliver you imagery around the globe in 0.5 meter to 5 meter resolution. If you want to know what your competition is doing, like the supply chain in China, you can watch their trucks carrying raw materials to their factories and final stuff coming out. You can watch your competition's cars in their parking lots, understand how much traffic is going to one store versus another. And if 1 meter resolution is not enough for you, it will be an army of drones. And the legalities will not hold them back. They're going to become cheaper and so elusive that they're going to be flying. And if that's not enough, whatever Google Glass becomes in millimeter resolution, giving you the ability to see anything you want, anytime you want, anywhere you want, we're going to be living into a perfect knowledge economy. How does that change your business? How do you tap into that? Because I can tell you, entrepreneurs are thinking about this every single day. 2 more technologies to talk about. The first is 3D printing, which is going to disrupt a $10 trillion industry. I'm on the board of 3D Systems, full disclosure. And we're now printing with 200 different materials. And the ability to print with 200 different materials is giving you the ability to produce, if I can go to the next slide, to produce basically, can we get the slide up here? Thank you. To produce anything, any shape at high resolution, layer by layer by layer, and complexity comes for free, as does personalization. So we've got this polygon within a polygon within a polygon. These are high-temperature titanium turbine blades that are being printed. And every next-generation GE and Rolls-Royce engine is being manufactured because of additive manufacturing. This is in China this year, I'm sorry, trying to get this. In China this year, there were 10 3D printed houses in 24 hours for $5,000 each. In the lower left hand, you see a person who lost, if I can get the slides tracking, please. person who lost his right lower limb, scanned his left limb, flipped the image, and then 3D printed a composite prosthetic. And for the ladies in the audience, I want you to imagine that you have a Saturday night gala, you don't know what to wear, you go online, you find a beautiful dress and pair of shoes designed in Bangladesh that morning, and you upload it to print it in your closet. You wear it, and then you process it again and wear something the next night. We're truly living in a world where the location of manufacturing is going to be changing. And for our previous speaker in China, when 3D printing allows you to produce exactly what you want, where you want it, immediately in your home or in your town, and the cost of electricity in China is the cost of electricity here, all of a sudden you're disintermediating an entire global industrial supply chain. And that last image over there, that 3D printed ring, actually comes off the 3D printer working instantly. So 3D printing is just one of the areas that's going to be massively disruptive this next decade. Let me share with you the last technology that I want to share, which is the whole area of genomics, the whole area of life sciences, which is probably the next multi-$100 billion, trillion-dollar marketplace. This is my business partner, Craig Venter, who in 2001 sequenced the first human genome. It cost him $100 million for his company to sequence his genome. They did it in 9 months. Today, the cost has gone from $100 million to about $1,000, 100,000-fold improvement in 14 years. 5 orders faster than Moore's Law. And this year, in March, I joint ventured with Craig Venter and a fellow Bob Huri, the top stem cell scientist, to create a new company called Human Longevity, Inc. And our mission in HLI is to literally make 100 years old the new 60. Our goal is to add 30 to 40 healthy years onto everybody's life this next decade. And to do that, what we've done is we've built the largest genome sequencing facility. So we're creating a healthcare database like nothing that's ever existed before, putting millions of people's full phenotypes, their full human genome, the 3 billion letters from your father, from your mother, 3 billion letters of haplotype phasing. But besides that, you're a collection of 10 trillion human cells and 100 trillion bacterial cells. Your microbiome affects how you feel, how you think, 10% of the chemicals in your bloodstream. So we'll be sequencing the full microbiome. We'll be doing full body high-resolution MRI data, protein data, and the 2,400 chemicals in your bloodstream. And then we're going to be data mining that to understand why do some people get cancer, why heart disease, why neurodegenerative, and how do you create drugs just for you. And this kind of capability to really read the full DNA map of the body and the brain is truly what's extraordinary right here and right now. It's going to transform longevity on this planet in an extraordinary fashion. 4 critical insights I want to share here. The first, the only constant is change, and the rate of change is increasing. The second, you either disrupt yourself or someone else will. Third, competition is no longer your multinational overseas. Competition is now the guy and gal in the garage who's willing to take extraordinary swings at the bat, fail 100 times in a row, and yet still keep going. And then finally, your mindset matters a lot. How you think about the world matters a tremendous amount. So I'm going to go into a last short segment on bold mindset. It's the subject of my next book called Bold, and I'm going to open with a video that I want you to take in. It's a video that comes out of my friends from Google X. You're going to see Astro Teller, who runs Google X, Megan Smith, who's now the US CTO as of 2 months ago, who was at Google X. And it's about changing the way we think about the future, about where are you going 10% bigger in your business, where you should be going 10 times bigger in your business. Because today, your population of entrepreneurs in your company, in your town, in your region, have extraordinary, powerful technologies. How do you unleash them? How do you allow them to think bigger? So please watch this video with me. It inspires me every time I see it, and we'll come back and talk about it.
The actual moonshot is wonderful, inspirational, poetic, beautiful, involved great technical challenges, genuine heroism. It brought the world together. But think about the Polynesian islander on the dugout canoe, deciding one day they were going to go that way. No one had ever been that way before. No one even knew if there was anything that way before. It was amazing, and it changed the world.
People can set their minds to magical, seemingly impossible ideas, and then through science and technology, bring them to reality. And that then sets other people on fire, that other things that look impossible might be accomplishable.
Galileo is such a hero, in thinking big, and what he represents to me is both curiosity and wonder that humanity had, that pushed him and drove himself to invent and work on the first telescopes that allowed us to see the moon, and here we are.
These aviation pioneers were figuring it out as they went. No one really knew how to build an airplane, right? No one knew how to fly an airplane. It was amazing and crazy and wonderful, and they wanted to explore.
Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there.
There's so many challenges in the world, and you could feel daunted by that, and sort of oppressed by that, or you kind of say, how might we think differently about this?
Everyone else in the world is working on that next 10%. If you can be the one that delivers that 10 times improvement, you have a chance to really change things.
If you want cars to run at 50 miles per gallon, fine, you can retool your car a little bit. But if I tell you it has to run on a gallon of gas for 500 miles, you have to start over.
You need a lot of courage in this work, and you need a lot of persistence. One of the things that's really critical is not only having the courage to keep trying every day or thinking big, even if you don't really 100% believe it's possible, like you might think, this might be possible, have the courage to try. That's how the greatest things have happened.
You don't spend your time being bothered that you can't teleport from here to Japan, because there's a part of you that thinks it's impossible. Moonshot thinking is choosing to be bothered by that.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Humanity's progress has been a series of amazing, audacious things, from the very small and personal up to the great, big, and grand. And we are a species of moonshots. And to me, that's like the really amazing, poetic, and inspirational thing.
I think our ambitions are a glass ceiling on what we can accomplish.
When you find your passion, you're unstoppable. You can make amazing things happen. It's been true through all of history.
I believe in the human spirit, and I believe that there are always going to be crazy people who will get out of bed one morning and say, you know what? I think I can build a space elevator, and let's go and do it. But I think that if we become afraid to take these great big risks, we stop inspiring people. We stop achieving things. And the biggest nightmare scenario is that we won't have what it takes to solve the really big challenges.
When Kennedy said that we would put a man on the moon, it's about the fact that he said, we don't know how to do this yet, and we're gonna do it anyway. And that sends chills up everybody's spine. Because if that happens, what couldn't we do?
Yeah. And that is a mindset, guys. This person, if we can go to here, is Astro Teller. He's an amazing person who leads Google's startup laboratory, Google X. And Google as a company, interestingly enough, is building, buying, creating 600 to 700 companies per year and killing most of them. You only see the ones that come out the top, but there's massive experimentation going on, which is a mindset. And Astro Teller, interestingly enough, his maternal and paternal grandfathers were both Nobel laureates, which is a pretty cool thing. So the question is, where inside your company, inside even Detroit or Michigan, are you trying to go 10% bigger, where you should be trying to go 10 times bigger? Taking that moonshot, because a lot of times, 10% bigger puts you in a smartness competition with everybody else. 10 times bigger gives you this passion, this vision of, and attracts the biggest minds to you. And it's not usually 100 times harder. And the economics do work out. So Google has 8 innovation principles I'll just share with you very, very briefly. The first is focus on the user. I think that's obvious. The second open will win. The notion that you can go anywhere, and creating an open platform that people can build on is critically important. Related to that, ideas can come from anywhere and everywhere. How do you source those ideas? Thinking big but starting small, literally that's the 10 to the 9th plus. I'm going to give you a chance, by the way, to download these slides later, so if you want this list. Think big, but start small. This 10 to the 9th plus thinking. Never fail to fail, this notion of rapid iteration. Launch early and iterate. Launch early and iterate is my friend at LinkedIn, who says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched it too late. But that's a mindset. And if you are focused on the perfect product, you may or may not have a consumer who wants it. Be a platform, float all boats, and finally make it matter. Make it matter is probably one of the most important things of creating a massively transformative purpose, a purpose that attracts the best minds and customers to you. That's big enough and bold enough that people say, I want that brand. I want to live in that city. I want to be part of that mindset, that massively transformative purpose. Let me share an example there. So this guy is Kelly Johnson. He created the first jet ever, created Lockheed Skunk Works. In 1943, we were losing in the United States against Nazi Germany because we didn't have a jet, and the Defense Department goes to Kelly Johnson, the VP of Engineering, goes, we need a jet, desperately. And Kelly Johnson pulls together a team, ultimately called Skunk Works, and he builds the P-80 jet. And in 143 days, he doesn't negotiate a contract. He doesn't come up with a design. He delivers a jet in 143 days, a working prototype, which, you can't even negotiate a contract in 143 days these days. Sad, but true. And he repeats that with the U-2 and the SR-71. And the question is, and in my book I talk about how Lockheed Skunk Works and Google X have very common things in common to each other. And let me share with you a couple of those things. I think it's very important as CEOs for us to think about this. And the very first thing is having a massively transformative purpose. Having a purpose that attracts the best talent on the planet to you because they want to be part of that MTP. For Google, it's organize the world's information. Right? For Lockheed Skunk Works, it was win over Nazi Germany. And the question is, for your company, can your employees, can your consumers, can your people tell you what your MTP is? That they will work with you and buy your product over anybody else's because it's a mission I care about. The second thing is, and this is the words of Kelly Johnson, and this is very true at Google X and a lot of the exponential companies, is the number of people connected to a project should be restricted in almost a vicious manner. And this is the notion that any team that does anything great and big is a small team of 6 to 8 people. It's what Jeff Bezos calls the 2-pizza rule, right? More than 2 pizzas to feed a team, it's too big a team. You want a team that literally has no CEO of a team. Communications, no communications plan for a team. The team talks, the team works together. There's diversity, there's capability, and they have the capability to take things and go forward. The second part of that is extreme isolation. And again, from Kelly Johnson, access to outsiders to the project and its personnel should be strictly controlled. It's why Stephen Jobs, when he created the Mac, took his team to a different building, put a pirate flag over and said, stay away. It's what IBM did with the PC. It's what we see over and over again for iTunes, for all of these projects. It's taking the startup mentality out of your headquarters, out of the immune reaction that anyone and everybody, I don't care if it's a company of 100 people, if it's something disruptive and different, you will get an immune reaction. And taking that group and moving them someplace far away where they can iterate and fail without the tarnish of the large organization. Just 3 more here. Authority and autonomy. It's giving that team and that team leader the authority and autonomy to do what they need, to fail, to try again, to iterate, to do things that you would never do because the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. And most large companies don't try crazy ideas because we're afraid of failure, but in fact, you want your team to try crazy ideas. And then flexibility. when Lockheed Skunk Works was operating, they had one drawing in the center of the room, and anyone could go and make a change to that drawing. And there was no going up the chain and down the chain to iterate. But they knew that if they made a change to that drawing, it could mean lives. So they cared. So that flexibility for rapid iteration gave them the ability to actually make decisions that were meaningful rapidly. And then finally, testing and experimentation, rapid testing experimentation, which is sort of the game plan for Silicon Valley. And I will close on this slide and just pull this up, that I have had the chance to work with and interview a number of amazing people, Larry and Elon and Jeff and Richard, and they all have in common a set of principles, many of which we've talked about here, that allow them to take on huge global issues with extraordinary success. Now, I won't go into the detail of this now, but I will close with one story and then give you a number to download these slides, which is a friend of mine, Philip Rosedale, did an analysis, and he asked, why was Silicon Valley so much more effective than other cities around the world? And what he did was he actually went to LinkedIn and he wrote a script, and he looked at the population of entrepreneurial CEOs per kilometer, basically, per 100 kilometer, per zip code. And what he found was that in places like, average mid-American cities was 10 per unit measure. In New York, it was 30. In Silicon Valley, it was 300. And it's the notion that when you have a high enough density of entrepreneurs, that they will take bigger risks because they know if they fail, they'll just go down to the coffee shop and team up with another entrepreneur and try again. So it's this rapid rate of iteration, this ability to fail and fail and fail. And oh, by the way, it's a mindset of, hey, let me share my idea with you because I want your feedback. Where there's a sharing economy. It's not like, oh, you can't tell you, I need an NDA to share my idea with you. That's bullshit. Because that gives you the complete opposite effect you want. You want everybody's minds sharing the ideas, building on the ideas, because they have their own idea. And they may like your idea and partner with you. But if you get enough of a density of entrepreneurs, you really can transform your city and your region. And it's that game that maybe we can talk about in the Q&A. If I can put my last slide up here, if you'd like a copy of these slides, if you just text only your first name and email to that phone number, my server will automatically send you a PDF of those slides. And I put out a weekly tech blog on the latest breakthroughs that I think are rocking the world. You'll get that as well. And if we do have a few minutes for Q&A, I'd love to do that. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time.
Please welcome to our stage the moderator, Daniel Howes, business columnist, Detroit News.
Very interesting. It's very interesting. I want to start with two opposing thoughts that I think you brought up. You talked about your last book, Abundance, and we're moving into an abundant, an increasingly abundant world, and I think that's, from everything I've read and heard, that's true. And you're talking about exponential growth. Oftentimes with abundance comes affluence, comes complacency. It's been the story of, to some extent, this town for many years. We're now coming on the other side. How do you reconcile those two, in some ways, megatrends that you're talking about?
So, affluence, let me define what I mean by abundance, first of all. For me, in the book, I talk about abundance being the ability to meet everyone's basic needs. So it's not about Ferraris and Louis Vuitton handbags.
Right.
It's about the notion of having food, water, shelter, healthcare, learning, education, freedom, energy, communications, these sorts of things that are becoming massively democratized. So all of us here are born with the same thing, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's how you use that time that matters. And if you're a billionaire, you have the ability to have a jet that saves you an hour at TSA. that's an advantage of how you might use your time. But if you're an average person, you have running water, roof over your head, phone. If you're the poorest on the planet, you've got to use your time to actually spend 3 hours to go fetch the water. You have to walk 2 days to go see a physician. And it's the use of time, ultimately. And Matt Ridley has a beautiful book on this subject, The Rational Optimist, I commend to you. And that use of time is really what's changing, because we've just launched a global learning XPRIZE a month ago. That's when I was at CGI. And this is for a piece of software that will take a child anywhere on the planet who's illiterate to reading, writing, and numeracy in 18 months. So imagine a piece of software that understands your child's language skills, cultural background, favorite sports star, movie star, favorite colors, and then creates an educational experience for that child that's perfect. And the billionaire or the poorest child has access to the best educational experience, effectively for free because it's cost of electricity. That's where we're heading there. We're also heading that way in healthcare. We're coming close to the end of the Qualcomm tricorder XPRIZE. We put up $10 million for a digital device that is not for a doctor and for a nurse. It's for a mother or father at 3 in the morning when your kid is sick that you can talk to. It's got Watson on the cloud, understands what you're asking, asks you questions, what you eat, how you feeling, all of those things. Cough on it, do a finger blood prick, and can do your full blood chemistries, and in success, diagnose you far better than any physician can, because the data is there. And again, that goes towards a demonetization and democratization. So if we can take out the cost of education, the cost of healthcare, it gives you, the poverty line is moving. What we consider impoverished today was what the robber barons had 150 years ago.
Right. Some of the examples you cite of these companies that have exploded on the scene, as you were going through your list, one of the thoughts I had was, a lot of those are have lower barriers to entry. A couple of guys get together, have a great idea, they blow somebody like Kodak out of the water. The auto industry, this is the home of the U.S. auto industry, has been a very capital-intensive business. And we've seen Elon Musk with Tesla has had some real struggles from time to time, being able to scale his product, get a product that's affordable. Is your analysis different for a high capital-intensive kind of industries?
Sure, it is for the time being. But I think that will slowly change too, because of the ability for an individual, I'm not going to say who or where, an individual to be able to have a conversation with an AI, know nothing about design, but know what he or she wants, be able to express one's desire. I'd love the car to be faster, and that AI be able to do the trades on aerodynamics and look and all of that. So all of a sudden, the artificial intelligence, and I'm not going to say this is a panacea for everything, but this is going on. Autodesk right now has the ability in the architecture space to do trades on your home design of efficiency, cost, fuel efficiency, energy efficiency, cost, square footage, and you can actually do trade space by having a conversation. The same thing will happen in the design space. And then the ability for 3D printing to prototype stuff for you, and robots to manufacture. The cost of, these things, it's really hard to project 20 years from now, let alone 5 years from now. So do I think that we're going to be changing how we manufacture, design, manufacture, distribute microfactories in 20 years for the automotive industry? Absolutely.
Final question. As I listen to the whole thing, what I'm struck by repeatedly is, how are people going to keep up? You have younger people, you have people that are in that Silicon Valley mindset that you talk about. That's the way they're geared. That's what they've chosen. There are a lot of other people in a lot of other parts of the world that aren't necessarily geared that way. And I wonder if you think that this rapid advancement, this exponential growth, is going to leave more and more people behind.
So listen, my goal here today is not to convince you of anything, or it's just to give people a heads up of what's there. Mm-hmm. Please know this is there. Know that companies around the world are far more capable than ever before, and that the Kodak moments are going to be seen over and over again. And as, because this is a CEO group, your job as a CEO is to actually understand how you tap into that. Not yourself, right? I employ, so I have 4 companies, and I have a small core group. I have a group of 4 22-year-olds just out of college. That is my strike force, literally. And I throw them at problems. And I say, go and look at this. And in fact, I love problems. I mine problems. I talk to a lot of hospital CEO organizations, a lot of boards of directors, and I say, go find some smart, young 22, 23-year-olds and have them go throughout your organization and document problems, interview people, and find what are the problems. Your problems are your business opportunities. The world's biggest problems are the world's biggest business opportunities. Help 1 billion people make $1 billion. That kind of mindset really needs to be pervading us more often. And so if you can mine those problems and ask your 20-somethings to come up with business plans of how they develop those problems into businesses, and then fund them. Every core business is ultimately going to collapse. It's really what you do on the margins that really dictates your future. So I'll leave it at that.
Peter Diamandis, thank you very much.